At work, it wouldn't be normal. You go, wow, those teeth, they're gorgeous. It's all because of Clear Choice.
Call Clear Choice today.
All right, Saturday Night Live was all over the explosive R. Kelly interview in their opening sketch. Here are some more late night laughs.
My first question for you, Robert, is why exactly are you doing this interview?
Because people think that I'm some kind of a monster. I'm here to remove all the doubt, okay? My lawyer was telling me no, but my ego was telling me yes.
Robert?
Please call me victim.
No.
Think for a minute. Use your brains. Why would I do these things? For 30 years. I gave y'all trapped in the closet. Feeling on your booty.
Robert.
Age ain't nothing but a number.
Robert.
And so many other clues.
It was reported that President Trump watched the Super Bowl at Mar-a-Lago with Li Yang, the woman who founded the chain of Asian day spas where Patriots owner Robert Kraft allegedly solicited a prostitute. First of all, what a time to be alive, huh? Second, you know that Trump spent all their time together trying to convince her to give up North Korea's nuclear weapons.
I gotta say, when the reality is more peculiar than the parody,
They write themselves.
it's 2019.
Why haven't we said what a time to be alive
Because
more often?
It could be the banner on the screen every morning. Thank you to our international viewers for watching. For you, CNN Talk is next. For our U.S. viewers, we are on the scene of a major air disaster, leading for calls to ground aircraft around the world.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your new day. We do begin with breaking news because Ethiopian Airlines says that investigators have just recovered both black boxes, meaning the voice and data recorder, from the crash site to try to figure out what happened. Boeing faces a lot of safety questions this morning because this is the second crash in just 5 months involving their best-selling passenger jet. Some airlines are now grounding the 737 MAX 8 after Sunday's crash. All 157 people on board were killed, including 8 Americans.
Now the question is, will U.S. carriers follow suit? Major U.S. carriers use this new aircraft. Hundreds are in service, thousands are on order, and there are calls this morning to ground all of them. CNN is the only network live at the crash site in Ethiopia. Our David McKenzie joins us now with the breaking details and the efforts going on right behind you, David.
That's right, John. Good morning. Just a short time ago, we had those flight data recorders, the voice recorders, taken out of the impact crater behind me. They would have dug it out with one of these large diggers, and then they rushed it off the scene into a truck that was waiting to take that. That will be a critical moment because they might now get a sense of what exactly happened when this brand new Boeing 737-800 plowed into this hillside behind me, killing all of those passengers tragically on board. And there have been terrible scenes here. Red Cross officials have been gingerly taking private belongings of people, placing it in a corner, and you just see the impact. The plane was ripped apart. There are even bits and pieces sitting behind me that are only maybe an inch big, metal just torn apart. U.S. ambassador spoke to us just a short time ago, said that investigators from America arriving tomorrow morning, Interpol, will be leading the grim task of identifying the bodies in conjunction with Ethiopian and Kenyan officials. But the question is, why?
And David, what has Boeing said about all of this? David, can you hear us? I think we've lost contact.
All right, we lost David McKenzie there, but it's remarkable to see the efforts behind him this morning. That recovery effort, not only for closure for the families, but also key with this investigation. And Boeing, as David would note, Boeing has had issues with this aircraft before, put out a statement that says Boeing is deeply saddened to learn of the passing of the passengers and crew on Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, a 737 MAX 8 aircraft. They also say to the families and loved ones of the passenger crew on board, they stand ready to support the Ethiopian Airlines team.
All right, we need to know much more about this. So joining us now is the former Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Transportation and CNN transportation analyst Mary Schiavo. Mary, nice to see you this morning. You've called this crash highly suspicious. What do you think happened from what you have heard?
Well, given the phase of flight where the plane was, the airspeed, at least the airspeed that's been indicated on various flight radar reporting sites, but of course it looks like the airspeed indicators were unreliable at the time, and the speed at which the plane experienced a difficulty, where it was, that they had a mechanical difficulty on board and were turning back, it looks very, very similar, and of course the same exact model of plane and 2 crashes of a brand new model of aircraft within 6 months. It's just unheard of. In history, what usually happens when you introduce a new airplane is you have hiccups, small hiccups, like the 787 had with the batteries, but you don't have 2 hull losses and fatalities like this with a new plane. The safety statistics are supposed to improve with new models, not deteriorate. So it's highly, highly troublesome.
And it's also very haunting when you remember the details of the Lion Air crash 5 months ago. Just explain to us in layman's terms. Basically, there was an automated system that the pilots on that flight couldn't override or didn't know that they could override manually. What went wrong there?
What went wrong on the Lion Air crash is they had a discrepancy in their instruments. In that case, it was something called the angle of attack indicator. That's, to put it in layman's term, how your nose is pointed with regard to the horizon, up, down, to put it in simple terms. And when they had this discrepancy, they were starting to troubleshoot, but the plane itself, and this at that time was unknown to the pilots, the plane itself was trained was computer programmed to put the nose down, and that was called MCAS, the system. And they did that because when they did the MAX 8, Boeing put on newer, heavier, more efficient engines, more thrust, and that changed what's called the center of gravity on the plane. And so they had to put the system in to put the nose down. They thought it was an additional measure for safety on the plane. But pilots said they did not know about it. So that was Lion Air. Here, it's very similar, except some things aren't lining up. For example, there wasn't this porpoising effect of the aircraft. As the Lion Air pilots fought the plane, the nose went up and down. Here, at the very end, the plane pitched up dramatically, looks like an aerodynamic stall, and then plunged into the earth. And there's an eyewitness report of smoke emanating from the plane. That didn't happen on Lion Air.
So now these 2 recorders, the 2 black boxes have been found, the voice and the data. So when will we have answers about what happened?
Oh, as soon as the NTSB, the United States National Transportation Safety Board, is there. They have one of the best black box labs in the world. They have all the equipment to do this. As soon as they can get those black boxes, get them secured, make sure that the housing hasn't been breached and the data hasn't been lost. It was a very intense fire. You might recall the black boxes in the World Trade Center planes were destroyed in the fire. So they get that data unloaded. They will know from the cockpit voice recorder as soon as they hear it what was going on. And then the flight data recorder on this plane has approximately 1,000 parameters of data, different data feeds from the plane. They will know by the end of the week what happened, I think.
Okay, so since we'll have answers in a relatively short time, should American Airlines, United Airlines, Southwest Airlines, the carriers here that use the 737 MAX 8 or Boeing ground this airliner until that happens?
Well, I think they should, just as a matter of common sense. There are huge questions about this plane. They're already just, the websites are just exploding, telling passengers how to check to see if their plane is one of these planes and how to get off of them. So I think they need to get a handle on this, both the airlines and Boeing. And frankly, if I was at Boeing, I would step forward and do it. Because remember, if an airline or a manufacturer, if an operator takes the lead on, this would be literally a revoking of the airworthiness certificate. But if the manufacturer takes the lead and controls it, then they have more control about what happens to their certificate. Chances are it wouldn't get revoked and they'd have to reapply to the FAA. So by getting on top of it, they're way ahead. And, it could turn out to be something entirely different, but with two mechanical problems. The pilots have already said they had a problem with the equipment. Boeing's on the hook either way. So they should get ahead of it and do it.
We will see if they take your suggestion today. Mary Schiavo, thank you very much for all of the expertise, as always.
You know, and if you're wondering, American, United, and Southwest all use this new aircraft. There are dozens of service in the United States at this moment, so it does have very real domestic implications.
I mean, as she's saying, people are already, as you can understand, on the websites trying to figure out if their next flight is one of these 737 MAX 8s.
All right, this morning, the new battle in Washington, it's a familiar one. President Trump will ask Congress today for $8.6 billion for a proposed wall along the Mexican border. Now, if this sounds familiar, he shut the government down over a fight with a request for much less money. Joining us now is Sung-Min Kim, White House reporter for The Washington Post, Margaret Talev, senior White House correspondent for Bloomberg News, and CNN political analyst David Gregory. Sung-Min, is this an issue of A, the president wanting the money, B, the president wanting a fight, or C, all of the above?
It is always C, all of the above in this case, particularly with that border wall. And look, the president has, despite the brutal 35-day partial government shutdown that we and Washington went through earlier this year over his border wall, the president is clearly itching for another fight. Again, now he's asking for about $5 billion from Congress for the wall in the DHS, but in the Homeland Security budget, and about $3.6 billion from the Pentagon budget for military construction that would actually go towards that wall. And that $8.6 billion figure mirrors actually the amount of money that he's trying to tap through various venues, including his national emergency declaration earlier this year, last month. But this is all, the border wall was a major part of his campaign promise. And this shows that this is going to be a theme that he continues to just to hammer through his reelection campaign. However, this time, now that Democrats are in control, it really matters less what the president is asking for. When House Republicans were in charge, they could take the number that was requested by the president and put it in their own budget and make it a fight. But Democrats have already said they are not even willing to entertain what the president is proposing right now.
Right. So what's the point, Margaret? I mean, this is a non-starter with Congress. They've already rejected this number. So why are we going through this exercise?
You may have heard of something coming up. It's called the 2020 election. And so we're beginning to see some strains of that obviously play out. The budget's always a political document as much as it is an actual planning document. But you really see some of those themes that are going to be prevalent now in 2020. A continued fight about the wall, a continued clash with Democrats that exists by design. An interesting kind of sub-theme to the budget document is the idea of deficits and deficit spending. There are a lot of Republicans. There certainly used to be a lot, including the president's chief of staff, who are against deficit spending, but in part because of the tax cuts for corporate and individual tax cuts that were part of the administration's own reform package. You're seeing it's going to take a while and some domestic cuts to sort of break even, if you will. But I really think 2020 is a pretty dominant theme here in the way things are shaping up. The president is looking forward to clashes with some of the most prominent names in the Democratic Party, and he'll get them with this budget.
$2.7 billion in spending cuts, we understand, part of this proposal. David Gregory, trillion in spending cuts. I have a hard time believing, though, there is this deep concern about deficits in this White House, based on what I've seen the last 2 years.
Right, and I think that's actually become a more bipartisan conclusion that, as Dick Cheney said as vice president, that Reagan proved that deficits don't matter. We see the political class increasingly behaving like that's actually the case. But the president is opening himself up to the claims of hypocrisy by a lot of conservatives who have spent the last decade saying that deficits do matter and that there was a debt crisis coming. I mean, they project in this administration enough economic growth to somehow lift all boats, but it's not going to escape that hypocrisy argument. And the larger point about border security that has to be remembered is that this president was serious about getting money for the wall. He had it on the table. He had a much bigger immigration deal that was possible. He didn't want it. And now he's saying two things at once. He's saying, to Ann Coulter, he's saying, parts of this wall are already being built. I've made good on my promise, while he's trying to force through the rest of it for a very narrow argument, which is not even about the wall. It's about beware of illegal immigrants coming into our country. They should scare you. You should be very, very worried. That's what his very narrow appeal will be in 2020, just like it was in 2016.
I mean, and Sung-Min, of course, this also calls for cuts. I mean, I think 5% across the board, or at least cuts to education, health, environmental protections. Will he be penalized for wanting to do that? Are there parts of the base who think that those things are important to them?
But you could also look at what the president is trying to do with his budget, too, because he's actually trying to increase the military, the defense spending budget as well. We're at $716 billion now. He wants to raise that to $750 billion in the next fiscal year. And that is something that he has promised a lot and touted a lot on the campaign trail, how much more money the military is getting. It was actually almost about a year ago when he looked like he wasn't going to sign the spending bill that time over disputes over the wall. Republicans were actually able to persuade him to sign it because of that major spending increase for the military. So this really is a blueprint in terms of his priorities coming to the 2020 election. The problem for him is it's only really a vision that's not really going anywhere in reality.
So, Margaret, let's talk about 2020, because the Democratic field, a new CNN poll came out this weekend among Iowa voters. Obviously, Iowa, has the first caucuses. And in Iowa, Joe Biden is in the lead. He's at 27%, Bernie Sanders at 25%, Elizabeth Warren at 9%, Kamala Harris at 7%. When you look at this, Biden, people have said his numbers are inflated because of name recognition, but it's been inflated for a long time now.
Yeah, it's pretty breathtaking that you're looking at the two of the older, both in terms of how long we've known about them and how old they actually are, gentlemen in Democratic politics dominating right around that 50% threshold. But it really is still name recognition at this point. And in terms of where the energy is, in terms of where voters are, I think both of those guys, both Biden and Sanders, know it's really too soon to sort of hang your hat on that. On the other hand, if you're looking for maybe sort of a tipping point reason to decide when you're going to get in or how you're going to get in or if you're going to get in, maybe 27% is that. But, I think the decline of Beto O'Rourke is potentially interesting in those early poll findings. And I think whether Harris's number is sort of undercounted there in terms of the sort of motivation and energy you hear throughout Democratic politics is also going to be interesting to watch in the next few weeks.
Go ahead, David.
I just think it's interesting, a couple of things. One, you see one of the rationales for Biden will have several dimensions to it, right? Name recognition, the fact that people can close their eyes and imagine him as president. They've seen him as vice president. He's run for president before. They can see all the attributes, kind of restoring America on the world stage, being a leader that could bring the party together. But there's also older caucus goers in that poll in Iowa who were gravitating toward him. Ironically, younger caucus goers in Iowa gravitating toward Bernie Sanders. Again, Sanders occupying what is a known lane for him, which is younger, more progressive voters. And now he's going to have a lot more competition in that space. Biden still stands apart with all of his strengths and weaknesses that make him kind of an old Democrat. But he's reaping the benefit of that and kind of being alone in that lane as the older establishment Democrat right now who's run before and has all this experience. He's, on day one, even before day one, he takes all that oxygen out of the room, and that's going to be a lot of information for the rest of the field.
Sungmin, on the Republican side, there was a question posed to registered Republicans about whether they would like to see, should a Republican challenger challenge President Trump. 40% said yes, 41% said no, so they were split. But in other polls, the majority still say that they will vote for President Trump, and he still has very high support among Republicans. So I can't tell if that's just for the entertainment factor, why they would want somebody to run against him.
Well, I would imagine that Maryland Governor Larry Hogan might be looking at those poll numbers pretty carefully right now. We know that he's kind of distanced himself from the national, he's openly entertained the prospect of, or he hasn't ruled out a challenge against him. But I do think you're starting to see the president's reelection message really come into sharp focus here, because we've seen the message will be very similar to the kind of this nationalist America First message of 2016. And also what he tried to bring in during the 2018 midterm campaign. But we're starting to see that pair up with kind of the logistical side of things. We're reporting last night that the president does have, paired with the Republican National Committee, a very sophisticated digital apparatus ready to go. So, and while the campaign side gears up on that end, you see the president driving his message over and over, particularly at the Conservative Political Action Conference 2 weekends ago, and really driving on that message that the Democratic Party has shifted leftward, and it's a message that's also being reflected by House Republicans who want to win back that majority and are targeting the 23 Democratic freshmen who won in Trump districts to flip the House.
All right, friends, Sung Min, Margaret David, thank you all very much.
All right, the House Intelligence Chairman says it would be a mistake for Robert Mueller not to get President Trump to testify under oath before finishing the Mueller report. Will that happen? Is it too late? We discuss it next.
360, tonight at 8 Eastern on CNN.
Yes, I think it is a mistake, and I've said all along that I don't think Bob Mueller should rely on written answers. I think the constraint that Bob Mueller is operating under is he had an acting attorney general who was appointed because he would be hostile to a subpoena on the president, and now he has a permanent attorney general who was chosen for the same hostility to his investigation, who would likely oppose that step.
As the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, calling on special counsel Robert Mueller to subpoena President Trump, or something like that, at least saying it would be a mistake not to. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Jim Himes. He serves on that committee. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Allison.
Do you think it will be a mistake if the Mueller report comes out and they're never without any sworn testimony orally from President Trump and they've only relied on those written answers?
Well, I think Adam is right in the sense that if the president has something to hide, just relying on witness answers, or written answers, I should say, is a problem. And we all know why, right? It's always the follow-up question where you learn the interesting information. But here's the thing. I have no doubt that Robert Mueller, knowing the character of the man, if he thought he needed that information, he would have gone for it. He would have said, look, there's a precedent here. Bill Clinton answered questions via videotape. I guess it was a video arrangement rather than live. But it's interesting to reflect on the fact that I don't think Mueller would have simply deferred to the idea that the president doesn't want to. So what I infer from that is that Mueller has whatever he needs. And I should say here, you know, I never believed for one moment that whatever it was 2 or 3 weeks ago that the Mueller report was coming out that week. People have been wrong about when it comes out. But I guess my point is that, of course, if Mueller needed to talk to the president to get at the truth, he should have done it orally. I don't think these written answers would do the trick. But evidently, Mueller seems to think he has what he needs.
So, in that case, is that your chairman, Adam Schiff, just trying to lower expectations for what will be in it?
No, I don't think so. I think Adam was probably just trying to answer a very narrow question, which is if you're looking for the truth, should you be able to interview somebody live? Look, none of us, including Adam, know what is in the Mueller report. As you might imagine, the special counsel has been very careful about sharing anything with Congress other than information necessary to deconflict the various investigations going on. So I've said all along here that two things. Number one, let's not prejudge what is out there. And number two, I've been saying for a very long time that if the American public is expecting some massive Hollywood ending here where, you know, Vladimir Putin showed up with videotapes and got suitcases full of cash, that's not the way the Russians operate. The way the Russians operate is what we have seen so far in the many indictments. They send lots of people out to make lots of contact, lots of ambiguity, have meetings and do things that cause lots of people to lie, which of course has been the story of this investigation so far.
I want to ask you about the DNC decision not to hold debates on Fox. You go on Fox. You're interviewed by the folks over at Fox. Do you think that was the right decision from the DNC?
Well, with all due respect to the DNC, no, I don't think it was the right decision. You know, look, it's no surprise to anybody, including to Fox News watchers, that Fox is largely an instrument of the right wing of the Republican Party. It's a propaganda arm for the White House. However, and the reason I go on Fox is that it's watched by millions and millions of Americans. And I'm a big believer that if you put our ideas, democratic ideas, which are about universal health care, making it easier for kids to go to college, making retirements more secure, against whatever the nonsense is on the other side, cutting taxes for corporations and very wealthy people, hey, I don't care what channel you're on, we will have the appealing ideas. So I would have made a different decision, with all due respect to the DNC.
But I mean, it's interesting, Congressman, since you believe it's a propaganda arm for the White House, but you're trying to get your ideas out there and you think that you need to speak to the Fox audience. Have you ever seen your interviews move the needle?
Well, you know, one of the secrets, not so secrets about television, of course, is that they say that, you know, 70% of the impression that is formed with the volume off. You know, again, I think our candidates will make a far better impression with the volume off, and certainly with the volume on, in a general debate with President Trump. So look, you know, a debate is a very carefully orchestrated thing. I go on Tucker Carlson, I go on Fox and Friends. It can get uncomfortable because when they don't like where you're going, they cut you off, they go somewhere else, they throw a lot of the nonsense out there. But a debate is a very highly structured moment, right? You know, it is in some senses fair. It's not like, you know, Sean Hannity can jump in and challenge Bernie Sanders. So again, with all due respect to the DNC, that's a huge audience. As they say, you don't need to persuade your friends, you need to persuade people who disagree with you. So I would have made a different decision.
Congressman Jim Himes, we appreciate you coming on New Day. We keep the volume on when you're here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison.
All right, are Republicans going to back President Trump's attempt to get billions of dollars more, still more, for his border wall after Congress for a new fight with Democrats over funding for a border wall? The president plans to ask Congress today for nearly $9 billion for the wall in his 2020 budget. This comes after Congress rejected far less than that amount. You might remember the shutdown that lasted for more than 30 days. Joining me now is Republican member of Congress, Michael Waltz from Florida. Congressman, it is always a pleasure to have you on New Day. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, John.
When you read the president's budget proposal, more than $8 billion for a border wall, when his last fight over funding for the border wall led to a 35-day shutdown, was your response, here we go again?
Well, it shouldn't be a surprise. The president's budget, just to remind everyone, is a reflection of his priorities. Every president's budget's a reflection of their priorities, but it will come over to the House, which is currently, as you know, led by the Democrats, and then it'll have to reach a bipartisan consensus over in the Senate. So I think this thing's going to go through some machinations over the next several months. But it doesn't surprise me that that's what came over. The president has been very clear about supporting the border, and I think it's also worth reminding everyone that $5.7 billion wasn't a figure that the White House made up. That came from Border Patrol. The president shifted on his rhetoric to say these are strategically placed barriers in places where the Border Patrol has requested them. So I think you're certainly going to see Republican support. My point, John, is we have to get past this border control issue. We have to control our border so that we can get to meaningful legal immigration reform, so that we can get to DACA, to temporary protective status, to chain migration, to the visas that the technology sector desperately needs in order to get the talent that they need. And that's the bigger deal that I'm really looking forward to getting towards.
Is it worth another shutdown next fall if it comes to that?
Well, I don't like shutdowns. I don't think anybody likes shutdowns, and certainly are the folks in the Coast Guard and other places that are defending this country and aren't getting paid. So I hope we can avoid that. We should avoid that. Congress needs to do its job. Let's come to a compromise. Let's cut a deal, and let's move the country forward.
Let me ask you this. I know you care deeply about the battle against ISIS. You, of course, are a decorated veteran, Special Forces veteran. The president keeps on saying that the ISIS caliphate is 100% defeated. Why are you concerned with declaring victory over ISIS?
I think we're talking past each other in some ways. I give the president credit, and certainly the military, for defeating ISIS as a caliphate, a country that at one point was the size of Maine and with an economy the size of Austria. So it deserves full credit there, but we have to stay on offense. ISIS is defeated as a caliphate, but absolutely not as a movement. It's metastasizing. It's actually growing in places like Afghanistan, and we need to decide. There's this notion, John, in Washington, leave it alone. Let the folks over in the region deal with it. If we don't fight it over there and fight these wars in places like Kabul and Damascus, it will follow us home. We saw that when President Obama pulled out of Iraq. And that's where we saw attacks all over Europe and in places like San Bernardino and Orlando. There's a reason that hasn't happened in the last 2 years, because we've stayed on offense, but we can't quit now. We have to keep our foot on the necks of these terrorist groups.
Congressman, if you will, I do want to ask you something. You are a frequent guest on cable across the board. You're a good sport about going on and answering questions. You go on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox News, and there have been overnight some transcripts of radio interviews he's done, years worth, where he has said genuinely offensive things about women. I want to read you one thing he said about current Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan. He was talking about her appearance. He said, "I feel sorry for her in that way. I feel sorry for unattractive women. No, it's just absolutely fundamental. Physically, the problem with her are fundamental. She's never going to be an attractive woman." And this is just, I have to say, Congressman, the tip of the iceberg. He said other things equally, if not more offensive, even than this. Does it give you pause going on his show knowing that he said this?
Well, look, he's never said anything like that to me or around me. I've known him both personally and on air. So that's, I'm very surprised to hear that. That's the first I've heard of it. Look, I grew up with a single mother. I'm a dad of a little girl, and I'm very surprised to hear that. But at the end of the day, I am a huge proponent of girls' education, of women's empowerment. And it's not, John, this is not just a domestic issue here that we need to get better on. This is a national security issue. Yeah. In societies where women thrive around the world, civil society, politics, business, we don't have an extremist problem to the point we were just talking about with ISIS. So if I ever hear that type of language, I'll be sure to take it head on.
All right. Well, I recommend that you go listen to these tapes or read these transcripts, and you can take it up with him next time you see him. I want to ask you about a piece of legislation. I think we should celebrate any bipartisan legislation, any chance we get. Bob Levinson, it's been 12 years since he was taken hostage in Iran, and you're part of bipartisan legislation to try to streamline and enhance the hostage recovery or negotiation process. Explain.
Well, so Levinson has been held. He was a former FBI agent that visited an island off of Iran and disappeared. I don't think for a second that the Iranian regime doesn't know where he is or what happened to him. And for 12 years, the Levinson family has been seeking answers. And, to their point, multiple administrations have not held the Iranians to account. And what's truly sad is both Levinson and a gentleman by the name of Samyak Namazi were left behind when the Iran deal was consummated. They were promised that they would be on the plane, and then they didn't show up, and they've been left behind. The bigger point, though, is we need to increase the costs for whether it's the Iranian regime, your colleague Austin Tice over in Syria, or various terrorist groups. Right now, there's very little downside for them to take an American hostage purely because they're American. And I want to increase the cost, whether it's through sanctions, whether it's through military involvement with these terrorist groups, so that they think twice before they take an American, because they have a lot more to lose than to gain. And currently, that's not the dynamic, but that's what we're seeking to get through this legislation.
Congressman Michael Waltz, thank you for the work you've been doing. Thanks for being with us this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. All righty.
All right, John, remember how Republicans treated President Clinton's scandal? Why is President Trump getting very different treatment? We have an eye-opening reality check next.
Trump's potentially law-breaking behavior have remained remarkably consistent and held other presidents to the exact same standard, right?
Are you kidding?
John Avlon here with a reality check, sir.
That's right, guys. Look, there's an old saying in American politics that a Democratic crook is just as bad as a Republican crook. Point, of course, is that we should hold people to the same standards, regardless of political party. It's a good, solid principle. And today, it seems almost impossibly quaint. During Michael Cohen's testimony, for example, we saw Republicans attack the witness rather than ask any questions about his serious allegations about President Trump. Here on New Day, we saw Senator Mike Rounds essentially dismiss the hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels. Rounds excused the lies by saying that Trump did these things because...
I honestly think this president loves his family.
Loves his family. The standard we're in danger of seeing, of course, is that lies and obstruction of justice don't matter to Republicans when it's about a president from their party. And we know this is situational ethics because 20 years ago, some of the same senators were singing a very different tune. Here's Senator Mitch McConnell talking to CNN in 1999 about impeachment proceedings against President Bill Clinton.
The problem is lying under oath and obstructing justice. The subject matter is not what is significant here. It is lying under oath and obstructing justice.
And for the record, McConnell voted to find Clinton guilty on both counts, lying and obstruction of justice. What about Senator Lindsey Graham, one of President Trump's staunchest defenders? Well, when President Clinton was on trial, he offered a very low bar for impeachment.
The point I'm trying to make is you don't even have to be convicted of a crime to lose your job in this constitutional republic. Impeachment is not about punishment. Impeachment is about cleansing the office.
Cleansing the office. To choose just another example, how about Senator Chuck Grassley? Back in 1999, here's what he told CNN about the importance of leaving partisanship aside and focusing on the facts in pursuit of the truth. Quote, "We are miraculously transformed from politicians to people who leave their Republican and Democrat labels at the door. We're there to seek the truth and to find out whether the president is guilty or not guilty, and no stone should be left unturned to make that determination." But today, the search for the truth seems secondary for most Senate Republicans. When it was all over in 1999, a handful of House Democrats voted against President Clinton, and dozens of Republicans sided with the Democrats, crossing partisan lines. There were still some politicians who put their principles ahead of party in 1999, apparently, and there's precious little evidence of that now. And for what it's worth, one of the first Senate Democrats to publicly condemn Clinton's behavior, though not to vote for his removal from office, was Joe Lieberman, and his independence earned him a spot on the Democratic ticket as Al Gore's running mate in 2000. Look, hypocrisy used to be the unforgivable sin in American politics, but that seems to be one more casualty of Donald Trump's presidency. But at least we have the evidence of the double standard and the complete surrender to situational ethics that is the hallmark of hyperpartisanship. And that's your reality check.
Helpful reminder. Thank you very much, John.
Yeah, and nothing says I love you more than hush money payoffs to porn stars.
That's the Hallmark card that they're working on.
Exactly. Happy Valentine's Day.
Wow.
All right, John, thank you. Fox News issued a rare rebuke of one of its own hosts. What Jeanine Pirro said to draw condemnation from the network. Another host had said some pretty remarkable things as well. Will that receive a similar condemnation? All right, time for CNN Business Now. Boeing stock taking a big hit after a deadly plane crash involving its most popular aircraft, and it's driving down the Dow ahead of the open. CNN Business correspondent Allison Cossack joins us now with more. Allison.
John, we are watching shares of Boeing right now. They are down 10% in the pre-market after the second crash of a new 737 MAX 8 in the last 5 months. We could likely see Boeing actually slice a couple of hundred points right off the Dow today. The Dow index, it is price weighted, so a higher share price will cause a bigger impact on the index as a whole. So Boeing shares were over $400 a piece Friday. Now they are down to $382, so it's going to be a huge driver today to keep your eye on. All 157 people on board an Ethiopian Airlines flight to Nairobi died Sunday morning when their plane went down shortly after takeoff. The pilot had reported technical difficulties. This comes just 5 months after another Boeing jet went down, killing 189 people in Indonesia aboard a Lion Air flight. Both flights involved Boeing's brand new 737 MAX 8, the manufacturer's top-selling plane. Now, there is no evidence the two disasters are linked, but if one issue caused both crashes, Boeing may have to very quickly implement modifications to its fleet. American, Southwest, and United fly dozens of them right here in the United States. The crashes could result in major consequences for Boeing's 737 MAX 8 program and tarnish the company's reputation for safety. This morning, Ethiopian Airlines, all Chinese airlines, Indonesia, and Cayman Airways are grounding all Boeing 737 MAX 8s. Boeing is now delaying plans to unveil its huge new 777X jetliner this week. So huge implications after this accident. Allison and John?
Allison, thank you very much. We've been following that all morning. Meanwhile, Fox TV host Jeanine Pirro is under fire this morning for comments she made on her show Saturday night about Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, a practicing Muslim who wears a hijab. Listen.
Think about it. Omar wears a hijab, which according to the Quran 33:59 tells women to cover so they won't get molested. Is her adherence to this Islamic doctrine indicative of her adherence to Sharia law, which in itself is antithetical to the United States Constitution?
Let's discuss this with Brian Stelter, CNN chief media correspondent and anchor of Reliable Sources, and John Avlon, CNN senior political analyst. Brian, this did not surprise me when I worked at Fox. Sharia law was one of their favorite boogeymen.
Yes.
Roger Ailes was very exercised about Sharia law. And so we did a lot of segments on Sharia law. None of them were fact-based, or they didn't, there was no emphasis on them being fact-based.
They were fear-based. Fear-based.
They were fear-based. And so I hear that language. That's familiar, old language. And I guess the only thing that is surprising is that Fox put out a statement condemning Jeanine Pirro. I mean, it took them 24 hours to get around to it. So after 24 hours of, I guess, outcry online, Fox put out a statement saying, we strongly condemn Jeanine Pirro's comments.